Evening, everyone, and happy Holy Week. And thank you for joining us for our Agape Latte this evening. Of course, I am Mr. Dermody here, the Director of Campus Ministry at Catholic Memorial School. Thank you for joining us. We are extremely excited to have you all join us this evening. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Agape Latte, it is a national faith storytelling series that was actually founded just up the street at Boston College by the C21 Center and the Campus Ministry Office that is now spread to over 50 colleges and high school campuses nationwide. And we here at Catholic Memorial School have been hosting these since the fall of 2017 and are blessed tonight to host our first ever, virtual Agape Latte. As we begin our evening here together, let us begin, as we do all things at Catholic Memorial, in prayer. Please join me in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Almighty Father, thank you for the gift of this day and for the Catholic Memorial community. Please give us the grace and mercy during this Holy Week to see the hope that you give us and gave us by sending us your only Son, Jesus Christ, to die for us. May we see how we can honor you and bring glory to your name by walking in the way of Jesus. And may we seek you evermore as we walk with you throughout this Holy Week and beyond. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Wonderful. So again, welcome all. With that, I am incredibly grateful to welcome our speaker for tonight, Mrs. Karen Kiefer. Karen is the director of the Church in the 21st Century Center at Boston College. And I must say that we at Catholic Memorial, and especially in our campus ministry office, are extremely grateful for our partnership with Karen and C21. And so tonight we're so thankful to have her join us to share her story with our community through the perspective of faith and hope, especially during this Holy Week and these uncertain times. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much for this invitation and for welcoming me into your Holy Week. Catholic Memorial just holds such a special place in my heart. I really enjoy working with all of you. And even though I'm the mother of 4 daughters, if we had had 4 sons, they all would have gone to Catholic Memorial. But anyway, thank you so much for the invitation. And again, for your time. I know it's a really busy week. So excited to talk about hope, right? I mean, hope in the backdrop of this pandemic, hope in the backdrop of all the challenges and struggles that each and every one of us has, because that's life. And also just talking about hope during Lent and during Holy Week, because we embrace the hope of Easter. So let me begin. What is hope? Where do we find hope? I love the words of this beautiful writer. His name's Cullen Murphy. So students, look him up, Cullen Murphy. And he says that hope lives in the miraculous intersection of one person's faith and another person's charity. So think about that, right? Hope lives in the miraculous intersection of one person's faith and another person's charity. Hold on to that as I continue, okay? Also, we have a very popular professor of theology over here at Boston College, and his name is Father Michael Himes. And Father Michael Himes says that hope is transformative. And the reason why hope is transformative is because it's so relational, that we experience it in communion with one another, which is like a beautiful thought. And he also reminds us that hope is not an accomplishment of ours. It's not an accomplishment. It's a precious gift. And it's given to us by God. So let's start there. So I've been thinking a lot about hope during Lent. And I've been thinking about the people in my life that have taught me lessons and that have taught me about hope because they've lived hope. And I'd like to introduce you to two of them tonight. The first one would be my oldest sister, Maureen. That's us. There she is. She's 3 years old and I'm 2 years old. And Maureen's life was marked by challenges, but defined by the love of hope. And then I'm going to introduce you to my other friend, Harold Ekman, who's a World War II US Army veteran. So let me introduce you to Harold first, but we're going to have to go back in time. Let's go back to Memorial Day weekend, 2008. I live in Wayland, Massachusetts, and we were running a community bread drive to honor our veterans during that weekend. What we did is we just asked people in our community to bake your favorite loaf of bread, wrap it, and tie it with a note of gratitude. And then we'd collect the breads and then spread them back into the community to honor our veterans. So at the local Starbucks in Wayland, that was the bread drop. So if you had a loaf of bread that was wrapped up like a gift, you dropped the bread off at Starbucks. So I was working at Starbucks at the community bread drive, and I'm with my daughter, Emma, who at the time was much younger. And she was probably around, 11 years old. And I'm, taking in breads, and I look out the window and I see this gentleman getting into his car. And I noticed on his license plate, it said Bronze Star. So I said, hey, Emma, take a loaf of bread and go outside and give that gentleman a loaf of bread and thank him for his service. So Emma darts out into the parking lot. She sees Harold and she says, excuse me, I can see by your license plate that you're a veteran. Please accept this loaf of bread. Happy Memorial Day. Thank you for your service. I kept looking out from the corner of my eye, and I saw that Harold seemed kind of stunned. And he just took the bread and said thank you and got in his car and drove away. So anyway, a couple of hours goes by and Harold shows up. He comes back into Starbucks and I'm at the table and he said, excuse me, are you the mother or someone of the young girl that offered me a loaf of bread earlier? And I said, oh yes, that's my daughter, Emma. And he said, my name is Harold Ekman. And I am a World War II veteran. I was a Jewish American US Army soldier at the time. And I was so startled when your daughter gave me the bread and offered gratitude for my service, because it was the first time anyone had ever thanked me for my service. And I said, oh my goodness, Harold, well, thank you for your service again. And I could tell he wanted to talk more. So I said, would you like to have a cup of coffee? We can sit down and chat. So sure enough, we sat down and we both had a cup of coffee. It wasn't a latte, an Agape Latte, but it kind of was. And we started to talk. And he said, accepting that loaf of bread was like a flashback for me. And it took me back in time to 1945. I'm in Czechoslovakia and I'm on occupational duty. And he said at the time, it was the end of the war and there were so many Germans that were leaving Germany and they were all refugees, 12 million of them. And they were displaced and they had nowhere to go and they had lost everything. And he said, and we were just getting people off the trains and then putting people on the trains. And he said, and I just saw such despair and not knowing where their next meal was coming from, where their life was going. Chaos was the mood of the time. There was no hope in the air. And I thought, what can we do? I'm a Jewish American soldier. I need to help these people. So I said to my comrades, we're always going to be fed. Every time we get a meal, let's shove food in our uniform and let's hide food so that when the displaced people come off of the trains, we can feed them. We can take care of them. So Harold and his comrades started to do that. And he said, all of a sudden, this woman approached, and he said what he and his comrades would do would they'd take rocks and they'd put like a handkerchief, or they'd put a shirt down or something to almost make like a tablecloth. And that's where they would feed people on rocks. And this woman came up to him and said, "You look so much like my son." And he said he looked at her. She looked to be about 30 years old. And he said, "Hello, my name's Harold Ekman." And she said, "Hello." And he said he couldn't remember what her name was. But she said, he said, "Let me give you bread." So he started to feed her, and she started to cry because she was so hungry. And then she said to him, "Harold, I've lost everything in this war. I've lost our home. I've lost our bookstore. I've lost my husband. And I've lost my only son on the Eastern Front. You don't know me. You're a Jewish American soldier," she was saying in her broken German. And she said, "Yet you feed me. You give me bread. You give me hope. I'm going to give you the only thing that I have left for my son." And she pulled out a knife and she said, "I'm going to give you this knife because I want you to remember that hope lives, and it's found in each other. You give me faith. You give me hope." And so she gave Harold the knife. So he said he took the knife and he kept it with him in a safe place. And then when he got home back to the States, he got married, and he said he remembers going up to his attic and he hid the knife because he had two sons and he didn't want his sons to find the knife and get hurt. And he said, "And I had that memory in my mind." He said, "But I hadn't thought about it in a long time. And what I'd like to do is go back home and go up in the attic and give you the knife, because I want to continue the circle of bread, the circle of hope, the circle of faith." And I said, "Harold, you already gave me the knife." Well, from that day forward, we became best buds. Harold was my friend for 10 years, and he taught me so much about faith and love and hope in his Jewish faith. And he taught me about compassion, and he taught me about history and lots about World War II. As a matter of fact, he started teaching our daughters, and they even wrote their college essays about Harold. We had so many cups of coffee together, and we shared so many stories. And it was a beautiful friendship that grew out of a chance meeting, right? Harold died on February 22nd, 2018. He passed away peacefully in his sleep. But his friendship and his lessons will never, ever die. They'll always live in my heart. And his hope will always live in my life. I think often about the chance meeting Harold, the chance meeting that Harold offered this refugee, because these Jewish people were refugees. He fed her and gave her hope. And then we gave Harold that bread and gave him hope. And as he said, the circle of hope and life and giving continues. That makes me know that Cullen Murphy is absolutely right. Hope lives in the miraculous intersection of one person's faith and another person's charity. Okay, now it's time for you to meet my sister Maureen. She was a year older than me. I guess you could say we were Irish twins. And Maureen was born into this world with more challenges than any of us could ever have. She had intellectual challenges. She had emotional challenges, and she had a whole lot of medical challenges. But hope was her friend. And in a beautiful way, Maureen was perpetually childlike. Even though she had just celebrated her 60th birthday 2 Easters ago, just before she passed away. Maureen loved Easter, right? So why did she love Easter? Because she was like a child, and it was always her birthday weekend. She loved Easter baskets. She loved chocolate bunnies. She loved getting a new dress or a new outfit for Mass. She loved the big family dinners where she would eat ham, and more ham. And she loved being together as a family. For Maureen, Easter defined love and hope. The more I think about it, though, the more I realize that with all the challenges that Maureen had, she loved each day because God gave her that special gift to see hope each day, even in the toughest of challenges. When I pray the Stations of the Cross during Lent, I always see Maureen with Jesus. I always see her carrying her cross and carrying her struggles, but moving forward, She was condemned as a child and bullied severely because she didn't fit in. She didn't measure up. She looked different. She acted different. She was different in a beautiful way. I'll never forget walking home from school in elementary school. It was an afternoon, and the two of us would always walk home together. And 2 neighborhood boys came from the back. I didn't even hear them, and they jumped her. She fell to the ground, and then both of them stuck all these green burrs all over her hair. She had beautiful long red hair. And green burrs, I don't know if you know it, but they stick in and you can't get them out. And so I screamed, and the next thing you know, Maureen had green burrs all over her head, all over her beautiful hair. All I could do, I was stunned. It was just walk her home. When we got home, I remember we were in the kitchen and my mother took her and she said, "It's going to be okay, Maureen. We'll get the burrs out." By the time my mother cut out the green burrs in my sister Maureen's hair, her beautiful long red hair was pixie short. And my mother said, "Don't worry about it, Maureen. It's only hair." What she didn't see were the tears streaming down my mother's face. But Maureen was hopeful. She was like, "I'm not worried. My hair will grow back." That's the way she treated adversity. That's the way she treated when people treated her unfairly. She would just fight back with love and with hope and with understanding. When I continue to pray through the stations, I think about Maureen a lot, and especially about the challenges that she faced. She couldn't see that well. She couldn't write that well. She couldn't speak that well. She couldn't hear that well. And glasses and hearing aids and all the doctors in the world, it never did the trick. But she persevered and she carried her own cross. But we as a family helped her and loved her through it. And Father Heim said that hope is communal, and that is true. We find it in each other. We find it in the love of each other and for each other. On the Stations of the Cross, station number 4 gets me every time, right? Our Blessed Mother sees Jesus, and he's fallen, and he's trying to carry the cross, and she sees him suffering, and he has blood all over him. And I think about what it must have been like for my mother to watch my sister be so challenged every day with life and wanting to help her. And yet sometimes only being able to love her through it. I think now, as a mother of my 4 girls, I've learned everything about mothering from my mother, and the way she loved my sister, and the way she just raised her up so that she could see God's light. 2 Easters ago, Maureen was really sick. It had been a tough year. She had been in and out of the hospital constantly. She just had so many issues and so many medical challenges, and many, many times they said she's not going to make it. But she knew differently. She was going to make it, and she pulled through, and we kept calling her the comeback kid. I can't even tell you how many trips to the ICU. But Maureen wanted to keep living because she loved us so much. She didn't want to leave us. And she would overcome every medical challenge. And then one day, she had just had so many seizures. And I was sitting there and she said to me, if I ever get to the point where I can't talk anymore, I want you and everyone to know how much I love you. Well, just after her 60th birthday, Maureen went home to God. She went home to her father, my father, and then our Father. And we knew that heaven won on that day. But what she left behind was a beautiful legacy of love and hope. And she wanted us to know that until she took her last breath. The reason why praying the Stations of the Cross reminds me of Maureen is because when I think back, she always offered us like a resurrection of spirit, right? Her whole life was a resurrection of spirit. And that's what she taught us. So tonight, I close and I think about the challenges we all have in our lives, right? So many, and so many that many of you don't even know what other people are going through. And of course, the pandemic. But all we really need to know is that our faith reminds us that all we need is the love of God and the love for each other, because that is the hope of Easter. And that is a hope to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, so much. Such beautiful stories you share with us of your sister Maureen and of course Harold.
Special.
I think especially during, of course, this Holy Week as well, we're reminded of the hope that is on the horizon, especially as you mentioned there at the end during these trying times. So we do have some questions. So I'll remind people, if you have a question you want to ask Karen, feel free to throw those using the Q&A function on the webinar. The first question, Karen, comes from Sam Cahill-Farella. He's one of our sophomores who asked, what advice would you give to people who've given up on their family or maybe who don't want to try and repair their relationships with them? Sounds like someone who's maybe lost hope.
Yeah. I guess the best advice that I could give would be to pray about it, to ask God for help, because God's always there. And I think we all have a tendency to be toughest on ourselves. And I think forgiveness is really hard. And I think forgiveness deserves a lot of prayers. And sometimes it might be easier to just give up. But God's right there. And God will help us live the love of hope, you know? And I think God helps us be our best selves. And forgiveness is a part of that. And love is all of that. So I would pray about it.
Thanks, Karen. In a similar vein, Mickey Doyle, another one of our sophomores, kind of asked, how do you try to hold on to this hope when life doesn't necessarily go as planned? I'm sure he's speaking to, of course, the past year.
Mm, yeah, it's really hard. I've often said to myself a million times, and I know to my husband, and I don't know what I would do without my faith. It's just holding on. It's like, you know, you talk about a core, right? They say when you're working out and you're doing exercise, like build your core, be strong. And if your faith in God is your core, nothing will destroy that. You can get through anything. And another thing too that I really recommend and where I find hope is I really live in the moment, day by day, hour by hour. I can pretty much get through anything. And I think allowing me to think, okay, here I am. This is what's happening this hour. Then I don't get so overwhelmed, because I think when we look at our lives sometimes and we look at all the things that we have to do, it's so overwhelming. And so I just think stay centered and live in the hour. And then you're like, okay, it's 10 o'clock. I can get to 11. And some days, literally, I am counting hour by hour. And then other days, the time just flies. But I definitely think just continuing to have that conversation with God. And it doesn't have to it's your own conversation, right? It's talking to God and asking for some help and finding new ways to draw closer to God. And that begins with just a simple conversation.
Mm. So that almost kind of segues into Dr. Follin, and another student of ours, Brady McGowan, had a great question of just what advice you would give the boys in terms of, very simple kind of practical advice on how to best engage with God, especially during kind of hard times.
Well, one thing that I say to my kids, and I'll say it to young people, because in a lot of ways you're distracted by not only your schedules, and being overwhelmed by that, but also by technology. And so I would maybe begin by just unplugging or taking your iPods out, or not iPods, earbuds, right? Earbuds.
Yeah.
My kids always laugh at me and roll their eyes, but like being attentive to hearing things, because God's always whispering. And I can't, even tell you the things that have happened to me that if I had my earbuds in, I never would have seen things. I never would have realized that there was a problem, or I never would have prayed about it, or miracles can happen in that regard. But I do think that it's kind of making a promise to yourself. Each day, start with that. Each day, I'm going to see God in something today. And then I'm going to write it down. Start with that. So where did you see God today? Right? And then the next thing you know, you're seeing God in a lot of places, not just like one place. So I'd start small and then grow. But I also think too that, there's nothing, I know I'm being away from church. Like I love the idea of like going into church and just sitting there and just being, and that now that churches are starting to open up, please God, it's a wonderful place to just pop into and just sit there by yourself. And think about it. You can go any place in the whole world, and find a Catholic church and sit in a pew in your home. So the church is your home and God is your Father. And just also too, I think connecting with God like that, it gives you a chance to see your gifts and to see the gifts that God gave you.
Yeah. So will you have time for maybe one or two more questions? When I hear you, Karen, talking about maybe kind of seeing God in all things, I know Mr. Array will appreciate this with his theology class, the idea of kind of sacramentals. And I hear the story you tell of Harold and his knife is kind of maybe an example of a sacramental and the vision of God, and certainly hope. So Kieran McGurn was asking, do you know what happened to the knife? And then maybe what could maybe be some other sacramentals we could look for in our day-to-day lives?
The knife stayed in the attic. And one of the reasons why it stayed in the attic was because Harold was just too old and feeble to go up and get it. And I didn't want the knife. And so I believe that it's still in his house. He lives in Natick. His wife, Esther, I think the boys have moved out, but I believe it's still in the attic. But it lives right here for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then maybe to wrap up, I think a good question I see a lot of people asking is kind of maybe who are some people who have inspired you or maybe spiritual role models for you, and even maybe touching on how your sister kind of helped inform your own vocation in spiritual life.
Well, I definitely give a lot of credit for my faith to my parents. They faith was so important in our family, and especially as we cared for Maureen as a family. I'm not going to say that everything was sunshine and roses growing up. It was hard. It was hard work. As a matter of fact, I had this imaginary friend. His name was Peter, and I had him as a child because my parents were always taking care of Maureen, and like I just was in my room and I just started like being able to talk to Peter and tell Peter things. And so I guess my parents for sure. And then I grew up in a time when the parish was the center of your life. You did everything at church and, at Fidelity House. And then I went to Arlington Catholic and so on and so on. But I will say that I went to Boston College, and coming to Boston College was life-changing for me, because I remember having a conversation with one of the Jesuits here, and Father Deneen, who has since gone home to God as well. And he said, I said to me, well, my parents said that charity begins at home. And if you have any extra time, you go to church. And I remember Father Deneen saying to me, but the world is your home. And that was like a paradigm shift for me, which was an opening for me to realize that I could serve God by serving others. And so I would say the Jesuits have profoundly influenced me. And then the people that I've just met along the way, there's no coincidence. It's all planned. God has our lives planned. And I would really encourage you to look for those people that can help grow your faith. I remember one student saying to me years ago, when I'm with someone that has a contagious faith, it just makes me want to grow mine more.
Well, I think everyone will probably agree with me. We can feel that contagious faith from you through your stories and everything this evening. So again, thank you so much for everything you do for, of course, CM and the C21 relationship, and for joining us tonight. I know, again, speaking on behalf of the campus ministry team and of course, Dr. Fullen, I feel incredibly blessed. And I know our boys are just so thankful to be at a school, certainly like Catholic Memorial, to have opportunities, like evenings like tonight, even amidst a pandemic, to have these discussions and think about our faith. So we're so thankful.
I am as well. And like I said, you all hold a dear place in my heart, and we're as close as an email. And also, I'm just wishing you all the hope of Easter.
Amen. So thank you all again for joining us. Karen, thank you for joining us. Have a great night, everyone. And of course, we'll end as we do everything at CM, praying that we hopefully will, especially this Easter weekend, live Jesus in our hearts forever. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.